At home or are you in the cottage?
I'm in Toronto.
Oh, okay, yay!
So home is Toronto. So Toronto for both of you, right?
That's yeah. Bryn and I actually know each other in real life, which is not the usual case with people I interview for Warwick.
I know.
We're real life foster friends.
Yeah.
It's always good though. I mean, and just so if you're joining us right now, if you're watching us on Facebook, welcome. We're here live with Bryn Turnbull again and Rachel McMillan again. And I say that with the most love because I love doing these. And Rachel, I love that you do them with us and always bringing great authors. And Bryn, welcome back. We were talking in the green room. You were here in, I think, 2020.
2020. Yeah.
Oh, for Woman Before Wallace.
Yeah. And it was, I think we both were just sort of like, that was just one of those, it just seems like, did those years really happen?
You know what? I know the year more from the books than the actual, I don't remember anything but the books.
Well, and when I see things that we did in like 2019, because we had some really big events, like live events in 2019. And folks, I mean, we're going to get to the conversation. We're just giving Facebook a minute or two to just let everybody know that we're live so that you don't miss any of this good conversation. But I looked at some of the events that we did in 2019. And one, it seems like that was just decades ago. And two, it's like, I can't believe we did those like big things back. I mean, it's just
for me, the huge thing, I was at ALA in Chicago last month and I hadn't been with and Bryn, you've done a few of these events where it's like massive, like 15,000 people.
Right.
And you almost forget that those 2.5, 3 years happened. Exactly. And for a moment you're like, wait, am I supposed to be we're hugging? It's just massive. Yeah.
Where there's no personal distancing anymore.
Yeah, it's been a weird time. But one of the things that happened wonderfully is that Bryn's book, her debut, was released in the worst time possible for a debut ever, and yet it did really well, especially in the Canadian bestseller lists. I mean, all of Bryn's books to date, there are 3: Woman Before Wallace, and the Last Grand Duchess, and now Paris Deception.
What we're talking about tonight.
Insta bestsellers here, which is it shows that good stories overcome horrible pandemics.
And that's what we're talking about as far as like, we were talking about that a little bit earlier because I said how's a book going? It's just like sometimes you just have to give it up to the gods and just like, and readers are finding it. And you write this and you write for you, but for your readers too. But it's like, if you love it, it's like somebody else is going to love it. Lots of people are loving it. So that's always a good thing.
It's definitely what you want, for sure.
For sure. And that's one of the reasons that honestly that I've continued doing that, and I continue doing the virtual events so that we can have wonderful authors from like you guys up from Canada, which we probably had to have a hard time getting you down to San Diego. But also for I'm still doing it for debut authors because they're just having a tough time out there.
They're so important, and honestly publishers are always saying do more, and Warwick's is fantastic for giving authors an avenue to be able to go back to their publishers and their publicity teams and say, hey, I am doing this. And I think that's so integral, because
it's just as hard as it was during the pandemic to be a debut, it's still hard because it's still they're not getting flung out like they used to pre-pandemic. So anyway,
and TikTok is not the answer for everything, unfortunately.
Not for everything. Okay, we've gabbed a little bit, and I want to make sure you all have a great conversation. Just really quick, I'm going to do a little bit of housekeeping. For those of you that are just joining us, I think we probably have people who are our old favorites, not old, but continued favorites. How about that? But Warwick's is located in San Diego, La Jolla, California. I am going to put into the chat of Facebook the link to order Bryn's book, The Paris Deception. If you're in the San Diego area, we'd love you to come to the store, though. Lots of other great things to pick up there. I will also put Rachel's newest book in there. And we still have them.
We're at Castle Keepers, I think.
Because that's the one with the 3 of you.
Yeah. Right? Yeah. There's so many books in my head.
No,
I'm writing so many right now. I'm like, which one are we on?
You are on travel. We can have a whole travel discussion just with you
I
on your
know,
research
yes.
trips. We need to do that one of these days. Let me do so anyway. So also in that comment section of Facebook, if you're watching this on YouTube later, we're not live with you, but it's going to be a great conversation. But in Facebook, if you're there, also Bryn and Rachel are going to talk for about 30-ish minutes. Think of some good questions. We love your questions too. Put those in the comment and I'll bring those to the ladies when they're done talking. So I got to do I think everybody's familiar with you two ladies, but I'm going to do my due diligence and do the official intro. So Bryn Turnbull is the international best-selling author of, like Rachel mentioned, The Woman Before Wallace, with a Master of Letters in Creative Writing from the University of St. Andrews, a Master of Professional Communication from Toronto Metropolitan University, and a bachelor's degree in English from McGill University. Bryn focuses on finding stories of women lost within the cracks of the historical record. And we are here today, like they mentioned, but can't mention it too often, to talk about her new book, The Paris Deception.
With this amazing cover that is
Such a
the
good
most
cover.
amazing cover of all time.
Such
ever.
a beautiful
Yes.
cover.
Yeah, they did I'm sure we'll talk about it. They did a really good job on that. Many of you know Rachel. She is the author of The London Restoration, The Mozart Code, The Herringford and Watts Mysteries, The Van Buren and DeLuca Mysteries, and the 3/4 Time series of contemporary Viennese romances. Castle Keepers, I think that's the one with your 3 authors.
That's the most recent, yeah.
Yep. She's also the author of Dream Plan Go. That's what I want to talk to her about, the travel guide to inspire independent adventure. This lady's always out doing research somewhere. She's a great friend of Warwick's with these interviews. So ladies, have a great conversation and we'll see you in about a half hour.
Thanks so
Thank
much, Julie.
you.
Thanks, Bryn. Oh my goodness, it's so fun to see you. Actually, Bryn and I both live in Toronto, and Warwick's viewers will recognize me because I've done many of these, but I think this is the first time that I've done an interview with an author that I actually know in real life. So this is very exciting for me because Bryn and I actually do know each other. Not that I don't know the other authors, it's just a very different, feel and jive. The Paris Deception is an absolutely glorious book, and it's historical fiction, which Grand Duchess and Woman Before Wallace, and the fact that it is not tied to a real historical female figure in the way that those other 2 biographical fiction works were. Where did you stumble upon this story?
So this book was it absolutely was a departure for me in that it's 2 fictional characters in a real world setting. But the real world setting is and was incredibly real. So it takes place in a museum in Paris called the Jeu de Paume, which is where the Nazis took all of the art that they looted from Jewish families during the Second World War. And they essentially used this museum kind of as their own personal art gallery. High-ranking Nazis would come in, they would pick which pieces of art they liked off the walls. They would send it back home to Germany to enjoy those pieces for themselves with absolutely no remuneration for the painting's proper owners. And so I knew about this museum. I knew about the impact that the war had on the art world, on the art community through all of these thefts. And that was really interesting to me as a sort of jumping off point for this novel. I knew I wanted to write a book about the Second World War. I wanted to set it in the art world. The other impetus for this book, there were two other threads that tie in. One was the case of a Dutch forger who operated in 1943 called Han van Meegeren, who sold a fake Vermeer to Hermann Göring in the Second World War and was brought up on charges of profiteering after the war. And he ended up repainting the piece in front of a jury to prove that he had done it the first time. And that, again, fascinated me. So that was like another thread that tied in. And then the final thread was actually a challenge set to me by my older brother, Alec, who asked me, he wanted me to write a book that he would enjoy better than his favorite movie, which was the Thomas Crown Affair.
It's so perfect, because if you like Monuments Men, if you like Thomas Crown
Yeah.
Affair, if you like Ocean's 11, this is the story for you. And yet it has so many of the hallmarks of your really amazing research. So I wondered if you could tell us, did you approach research for this story in the same way you did your more biographical novels? Was it the same, or was there a different experience in approaching the research for this?
I mean, it was a different experience because for the previous books, the story came out of the characters, right? Like I knew that I wanted to write a particular historical figure, and that was the jumping off point for the book. Whereas with this story, the setting itself was the jumping off point, and the historical context was the jumping off point. So that was where I did so much research, and the characters kind of materialized out of that research. Knowing where I needed particular characters to be, knowing what I needed their skill sets to be, to have them situated to do what they do in the novel. So that in that sense, it was a very different process. It still was a whole whack of research, which I always adore, like the research.
Especially for the art, eh?
For the art was incredible. And I got to go to Paris when I was writing this one.
Yes, that's one of my upcoming questions. Yes, but talk like you got to and that I'm a huge believer, and both of us were kind of trapped for a while. Toronto had some of the longest lockdowns in the world, but the fact that you were able to go to the location and step into the worlds of Sophie and Fabien, what did that trip to Paris allow you to do that perhaps books did not? And I am very much thinking of a story you told during your launch party, specifically around your thinking about the gates around the Jeu de Paume, and imagining basically Bryn had to think of life as a criminal. Can you expound on that for a little bit?
Absolutely. By the way, it was great to see you at the launch. Thank you for coming.
It was such a good launch, everybody. Oh, she's so amazing. Everybody loves her. Yeah.
Oh, thank you. No, so it was one of those. So the Jeu de Paume is a museum that like people don't really know about, but when I tell you where it is, you go, oh, of course it's right there. It is located within the Jardin des Tuileries, directly across from the Orangerie, which is where Monet's water lilies are situated. So it's like the mirror museum to the Orangerie. So it's within the walls of the Jardin des Tuileries. And when I was doing the research for this book, I knew more or less where the museum was, but I didn't realize quite how tall the gates of the Jardin des Tuileries are. And so initially when I wrote the book, or when I kind of was drafting the book, you can sort of yada yada a lot of things when you're drafting a novel. You can kind of go, okay, and then they like break into the museum and then da 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 da. But when you go and like stand in front of that museum, you realize, okay, that's a really tall order, because this museum has like 12-foot tall iron gates right there, which of course is one of the reasons the Nazis used that museum, because the security was so good for the time. So I ended up for about 2 days in Paris outside the museum, like taking notes and taking pictures and kind of like imagining, okay, well, if I'm going to do a heist, where am I breaking into the Jardin des Tuileries? How am I getting into the museum?
He didn't actually break in, everybody.
I didn't actually do it. But am I on a watch list? Probably.
Interpol's like, a weird Canadian woman, really well dressed. Why is she here?
Who is this lady? Who is this lady?
And I think that it's amazing, because one of the things that I've stumbled upon in my own research is the fact that the Nazis basically were able to pick and choose what music, what art was allowed as part of their propaganda, as part of their ideal for the master race. And they did this a lot with composers. They would rewrite a composer's Jewish history so that now he was a German citizen. And in your case, you're working with art by artists known as the Degenerates. Can you tell us a little bit about this art and what you found fascinating about researching these artists?
Yeah, absolutely. So, it's fairly well known that Hitler was a failed artist. He failed
Yeah.
to get into art school. I think twice
Just
he
go to
applied.
if so many men went to
Somebody should,
therapy.
honestly, they just need to go to therapy, but also like somebody should have just given him a wall and been like, okay, put some stuff up there. Like,
You're
good job.
fine.
You're fine. But so he fails out of art school and he absolutely hated that. And so art was one of his like big bugbears. And that was something that he really felt like needed to be, idealized and needed to be controlled. So he had very specific ideas on what art was and what art wasn't. And what art was in his mind was purely representational. So we're talking like, classic Renaissance art where it's just like, it's what you see is what you get.
Realism. Like he drew a lot of freaking churches and a lot of Viennese churches, which is why I've seen a lot of his art, because that's kind of my wheelhouse. But yeah, the dude didn't have a lot of imagination.
No imagination whatsoever. And so he didn't like art that was not representational. So art that challenged the status quo, Cubism, modernism, impressionism, all this sort of, the early 20th century, all of these different art movements that said, hey, how about we look at the world not as it is, but how it could be. And that was art that he felt was degenerate and that he felt was dangerous because it presented a vision of the world that he couldn't control. And if you have, in his mind, created a perfect society, what need is there for art that challenges what is and looks at what could be? So he felt that this art was ideologically impure. And he went on a campaign to eradicate it from Germany, eradicate all the degenerate art in public collections. And then he brought that ideology to France and to France's public collections, and specifically the private collections of Jewish collectors.
And it's astounding to me because art and culture, I think my next question was where do you start setting character theme, but you kind of preface that for us. So I'd like to maybe talk about what is it about Paris in World War II that draws historical fiction writers. Now, Paris Deception is different than a lot of the Parisian set World War II fiction a lot of you are familiar with. For one, there's no Eiffel Tower on the cover. And Bryn and I have talked about how I have a Paris set book coming up, and my one thing to my publisher was like, there will be no Eiffel Tower. And clearly there's not one here. But when you talk about how Hitler was very, very intentional in making sure that Paris still was this beacon of culture and light, that it wasn't bombed, that it looked very much the same, that people who were there were supposed to experience Paris much as it had been before the war, with some guidelines, some curfews, etc. But it was one of those cities that was not ravished like London was. What do you personally think is the draw to Paris during the war years? Because there are 18,000
books,
Paris set books in World War II.
Well, I mean, I think one of the big reasons, there are so many stories to tell. Paris was occupied for so long. And, Paris's citizens were living in such close proximity to occupying forces. I think that makes for a really compelling dynamic to look at what people were doing and how they were kind of living their lives and the choices that they were making in the face of this occupation.
And the facade of Paris as still being the propaganda from Paris is it's still the city of light, it's still great. We just happen to be here, but the cafes are open.
But the cafes are open. You just won't see any Jewish people there. And
no,
it was very creepy
because
it was, he saw it as sort of like a crown jewel in terms of like, oh, this is what will be when we take over the rest of Europe. And it's absolutely terrifying to think of. But when you look even just a tiny bit beneath the surface of what that was.
It's interesting too, because I once asked one of my editors about, the whole Paris thing. And she said that the Eiffel Tower, the distinguishable and familiar landmark that you could put on a cover, or that people could draw a picture of Paris in their head even before reading a book. And that's true. Not everybody has those cities that they're familiar with. And Paris, you introduce us to, I think, a new world. As you said, Jeu de Paume is not as well known as, say, the Louvre, and the art that you're talking about in this gorgeous, so good, is not as familiar. And I want to move a little bit from the setting and Paris to some of the more character type questions. As we've talked about, this is the first of your published works that didn't feature a starring heroine who is rooted in history. How did that change your approach? Was it easier in some ways, more challenging in other ways? How did you approach writing people that formed in your mind?
So I found it challenging because, when you've got a historical figure that you're working from, and I do have to say there is a historical heroine in this book as the secondary character in the form of Rose Valland, who I chat about a little bit later. But with this book, not having the kind of parameters of a character's life to work within was a really interesting challenge for me, because in my past books, it was like, okay, well, we know that character was in this room at this time, and these are the people that they met and that they knew, and this is what happened after that party that she went to. So you can kind of like go into their mind a little bit, and you can be creative with like why they're making the decisions that they're making. But I like staying within the historical decisions that they've made. With this book, not having that was a lot more difficult, because then you have to go into, well, why are they making the decisions that they're making? Why did they go into that room in the first place? And not having that answer, you have to build the whole backstory in a way that, like, I had the backstory for my first two main characters.
Because they told you what the backstory was. It's like, I've got to go to A to B to C. Yeah.
That they were here, here, and here, and you're filling in the world in between those touch points. Whereas with this, you're building all the touch points. But I loved that process. It was really, really cool.
Was there the freedom without the restrictions? I mean, you did two magnanimous historical figures, and the pressure of getting that right. I don't write biographical fiction partly because I'm terrified of it, but you do it so well. Was there a freedom in being like, okay, I can take a breath, I'm making these people up, yes, the setting has to be real, yes, the research has to be real to a point, but did you find a little bit of a freedom in being like, hey, I can follow down this rabbit hole, or I can take them down this path?
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. And I mean, with these characters, I think they're a lot closer to me than my previous two heroines. Like, these characters are much more like different facets of my personality, which was really it was fun to explore, but you also, like, in a certain way, have to confront uncomfortable things about yourself when you are writing those characters that are so close to your own, hopes and dreams and fears and, inadequacies in a way. So that I found a very interesting process. And
they counterbalance each other too. They're like two sides of the same. If you ever want a book, everybody, that passes the Bechdel test, which is a term that came up in film critiques and theory, that says that if you have two women on screen who are talking about something other than a man, it passes the Bechdel test. And you would be shocked at how many films and how many books do not pass this test. And I wanted to talk about your choice about the central relationship at the heart of the story. It's two sisters-in-law, and that is not a relationship that many books that I recall have explored. Why did you choose this particular family dynamic, and why was it so important for you to explore their relationship through this there's a familial thread here, but we all know from families, you can either be really close to luckily I'm close to my siblings, partners, but it doesn't always work that way. Was there an intentional decision in how you framed the relationship between the two women?
Oh, very much so. I agree. So first of all, telling me that my book passed the Bechdel test, that's like the greatest compliment ever. So thank you.
All of your books have, Bryn. All of them. And I know the next one will too.
Oh, yes. Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
This next one. I hope so. God, I have to start thinking about that.
Put it on a post-it.
Yeah, put it on a little post-it. But with these characters, I needed to find a way to connect the two of them, right? I needed them to have a common, I needed them to have enough of a commonality between them that they would trust each other in a time of war. Despite everything else that might have happened between them, they would trust each other. And so I wanted that like trust to be there at the center of their relationship, but I also didn't want their relationship to be easy, which is why when we first meet Sophie and Fabienne, their relationship is incredibly acrimonious. They are not friends. There's a great, deep, deep, deep hurt at the center of their relationship, which is the absence of the man that binds them together, Sophie's brother, Fabienne's husband. So, I thought that was a really interesting dynamic to play with. What happens when it's somebody that you have cut out of your life, but you have to bring back in for reasons that have nothing to do with the past, but everything to do with your future.
Oh, that's so good. And, I have so many questions, but I have to I'm like filtering through to like, what ones do I want to get to? Even though it's a very character driven piece, as we've mentioned before, it has the rhythms of something like the Thomas Crown Affair, something like Ocean's 11. The pacing in this novel is expert. In fact, I think it's one of the best paced historical fiction novels I've read in an age.
Oh my
Keeps
God,
the pages turning, but is still so rich in its development. How did you strike that balance? Like how? You genius. How did you do it? Tell us all.
Alchemy, I have no idea. I wish I could tell you. One of the things, I'm a plotter, so I like to, have at least like 75% of the book sorted at the get-go. But I also, I like to look at movies, I like to look at books the way that I look at movies. So that's kind of how I break them down in my mind. Like if I've got an action piece, which this book has a very big action piece. If I were directing that as a movie, what are the points that I need to hit and how quickly do I need to hit them? So I really see that.
Smart. I was watching a TikTok and it was all about the etymology of certain phrases. And one of them was cut to the chase. And that's from the era of silent films where if something was dragging, they'd be like, cut to the chase, cut to the big car chase, cut to the train moment. And I think that propels us because this amazing story, we know that something exciting is always going to happen. And another kind of writing type question for you, and it's one of my favorite questions because I'm an author who writes 10 times as much that ever goes into a book. So through edits, I always have to cut. And a lot of it has to be the fun facts I learned in research that I thought everybody would be excited about, but have to be a blog post instead. Was there, and I think now I know the answer because I also asked this during your launch. I'm such a nerd, but was there something in research and in the original draft that you had to cut because of page count, time, and the pacing of the book?
Ooh. Honestly, not much. With this book, I think because I did have it was so much more action oriented, I actually had to flesh some things out in the editorial process. Specifically everything that happens after the chase scene. Kind of building out the denouement of that and what are the consequences for the characters. That there was a lot of cutting that kind of came around that. I did have to take out a lot more about bakelite jewelry than I wanted to, because there's a whole segment in this book that has to deal with bakelite jewelry, which was an early form of thermoplastic that people used to make jewelry that mimicked different stones and different sort of natural materials. It's beautiful. So I went down a big research rabbit hole in terms in terms of jewelry that and in terms of Paris's fashion world during the Second World War that kind of ended up being a little lighter than I had initially wanted it to be, but
And especially because I mean, there are a lot of books that deal with fashion in Paris, Chanel in Paris, Paris dressmakers, Paris perfume, Paris everything. So it's really interesting that you were able to focus on the art world in such a unique way. I love this book so freaking much. Do you have any, you'd never, I'm assuming, plotted a caper before, and you kind of talked to us about how you had certain things in mind because you thought about it through a movie. Did you end up going to a certain film or a certain book to kind of get the creative juices flowing?
Not really, actually.
Just played out.
It just played out. Like there's sometimes when you're writing a book, something just comes into your head and it's just like, that's it, that's what it is. And with that chase scene, that's what happened. It just fit, and it was what it needed to be. And I think part of it was having gone to Paris and been at the Jardin. This is the only way that this could work.
Google Maps doesn't cut it always. And I know that not everybody is as privileged sometimes to be able to go there. Authors have to use whatever resources. I mean, clearly you can't go spend time in Russia right now to write Last Grand Duchess.
No, the Last Grand Duchess I did entirely online.
Yeah. And did you write chronologically, or did you have a moment where you were like, oh, I'm going to skip ahead because I can't wait to get to this part?
I wrote chronologically. But there's a lot of like flashbacks that happen in this book. We go into some of the, as I mentioned, writing characters, figuring out why they're acting the way they act. A lot of that has to do with figuring out what their backstory is. What are their childhood traumas? What did their parents used to say when they tucked them in at night? All of that goes into character development. And there was some of that character development that I just couldn't bear to leave off the page. So we go into the characters' sort of pasts in a way that I just loved being able to do.
I love that. Actually, unrelated. Have you seen How to Steal a Million with Audrey Hepburn and
No.
Peter O'Toole? You have to watch that movie. 1960s. It's adorable. It's a caper movie. It is, they steal anyway, look that up after we're finished. Everybody look that up. It is the most charming film, and Peter O'Toole and Audrey Hepburn have the most palpable, wonderful chemistry, and it's set in Paris, and Charles Boyer is like the police officer who's after them. It is a charming movie about a forgery, and it's just lovely. So if you're ever going to do a movie and book pairing, although this has a weightier historical background to it than this adorable, colorful comedy, but I think you'd really like it. What are some of your writing essentials? You know me, I like to work at little places, definitely Union Social here in Toronto. What does your world have to look like? Is there anything that gets you writing? I know you're a morning writer. How I tell you. Anyway, can you work us through what a writing day in the life of Bryn Turnbull looks like?
Yeah, no, I'm absolutely a morning writer. So like I'll crawl out of bed and go do a few hours in my pajamas with a cup of tea. And that's when I like get my best writing done. I find, I don't know why. I think it's just because like my brain isn't preoccupied with everything else.
It's weighed down with everything else. Yeah.
So like that's my favorite time to write. I write longhand predominantly. So like I've got my computer here and I've got my fountain pen and notepad here. And that's where I love doing the most writing is with my fountain pen.
Because then you get an edit while you transfer it to
you get an edit while you transfer. Exactly. So you're editing as you go, which I love being able to do. I write, if I'm in the city, I tend to go to coffee shops. Those are my favorite haunts for writing. There's something about that energy that
I love. The white noise. It's just enough white noise that you don't get too far in your head.
Exactly. And then my family has a cottage in the Great Lakes, and so that's like my favorite writing.
If you follow Bryn on social media, you'll see amazing how she takes a boat to a book signing. It's so cool.
It's so fun. It's so fun. I did a bunch of book tours or book clubs this past week.
Part of me is like sad that you're here. Why are you in Toronto, Bryn? Go back.
I had a couple things to do. I'm doing an event here in Toronto tomorrow. So
good.
which is a good reason.
Yeah.
You know, my other like necessary to write is my dog, my research
Yes.
assistant. She is like I need her around when I write. She's very inspiring.
She also keeps you on schedule because she will need you eventually. So you're like, okay.
She will, but she's incredibly good in the mornings. She's a couch potato. She doesn't get up until like 11 o'clock in the morning. So I get a ton of writing done before she
So
wakes
it's not like you wake up at 6 o'clock because the dog is like, it's time to go.
No, at like 11 o'clock, I have to go in and be like, for the love of God, we're going outside. We're going, like, you need a walk.
I love this. And I think we're almost at our half hours. So I want to end on the question that I always ask everybody I talk to. And that is, do you have any book recommendations or reading recommendations or books that you're excited about? What should we, I know I'm a horrible, because authors get asked this and they're like, what the heck? I know I just read 18 books. What are the titles? One of them had a blue cover.
I'm really excited for Eliza Knight has a book out. Very, very excited about Adela Stair.
Adela Stair. Yeah. And she stumbled upon that during her research about the Mitford sisters for the Mayfair bookshop. I love that little kernel of knowledge that led to that book. Yeah,
it just ends up in another book. And you know, Eliza's such an incredible writer, so I cannot wait to read that.
Yeah.
I'm also excited for Heather Webb's book about Frank Sinatra and Ava Gardner.
I read that one. It's so good.
Can't wait.
You're gonna love that one.
Yeah.
It's really classy. And are you able to talk about your upcoming book? Are we able to talk about what that one is? I never know where people's stages are.
So the next book, I'm working on it right now. It is about a couple that gets separated by the construction of the Berlin Wall.
How great is this hook, everybody? Come on, she's so smart.
So first book with a male protagonist in it as well as a female one. So
who comes up with that? I know what I'm gonna do next. Like, Bryn, you're wonderful, just so wonderful.
Well, so are you. Feeling is very mutual, Rachel.
I know. You both are awesome and great books, both of you. Okay, so I have one for you all. Have either of you read Such Good Friends? It's about Truman Capote and Lee Radswell.
I have not read that yet, but it's on the TBR list.
It's so good. I know other people have written about the swans and the whole bit, but for whatever reason, I can't think of Stephen Greco, Stephen Greco, I think is who wrote it. It had me down rabbit holes that you can't believe. Such a good. Oh, yeah, love it. So put that on your TBR list too. That's a good one. Okay, lots of stuff to talk to you about. So I'm going to go to a couple of the comments that are coming in from Pierre on Facebook. So first of all, he says, hello, Bryn. He finds this book so different from your first two. The amount of research you must have put in this book has to be insane. You kind of already went through with how you started, so you guys already covered that. But he also says the details and the art techniques are so amazing. But his question about your writing is, as you write a scene, in the back of your mind, do you keep track of what your other characters are doing?
Oh, that's a great question.
That is so smart.
That's really, really smart. To be honest with you, I kind of don't. Like, I'll go through the scene and I'll know where that character needs to be. And I'll sort of like have a bit of an inkling of where the other one is and what they're doing. But it often doesn't like come together until I'm into that next scene with the other character. And then I go, oh, right, that's what they were up to. That's a tricky one.
I know. But that is kind of interesting because that goes back to your thing that you were talking about, Rachel, like the caper and writing and knowing like what's happening, like who's doing what where, that has to be like.
For the caper, I had like the whole thing mapped out, like physically mapped out, being like, this is where this person is. That's where this person is. That's what this one's doing.
You have to almost have a map. And I started doing this because in edits for my most recent book that's coming out soon. I forgot where one guy was. I was like, where is he? We haven't seen him in chapters. Did I even move him to this new city where everybody is now? Like, you forget about people, and readers will not.
Oh,
you get so caught up in like, I need to get this on the page that it's like, okay, where is this person?
Oh yeah, readers, because I'm a reader, I'm not a writer, and so I'm always like,
Yeah.
Where they go? What are they doing?
Where did you go?
How did you get here? How
The
did
thing
you
I
get
always say to my creative writing students is secondary characters don't know that they're secondary, right? Like, so they're doing
Oh, that's so smart. Everybody,
You're
I'm writing this down.
Yeah. Like while
Writing
you're
this
making
down.
characters doing
The
what they're
best
doing,
tip ever.
secondary character is like having a life. They're doing things.
They're doing stuff. And they're
Yeah.
getting from A to B. They just didn't like freeze frame.
Yeah.
It wasn't like a freeze, a zoom freeze.
So smart.
Okay, and I found fascinating this. So you guys covered this right at the beginning, but that, and I can't remember the artist that you said that had to recreate a painting live in a courtroom.
Yes.
That is insane.
That's a whole book on its
That's
own.
a
Yeah,
whole
it's a whole book. Well, and he was kind of one of these people, like he was either a hero or a villain, depending on kind of who you're talking to and what angle you're approaching the story from.
Ooh, interesting.
Han Van Meegeren was his name.
That is
Yeah.
so the
That's
things
crazy.
that people did
Oh,
and
yeah.
what they got away with and what they didn't get away with during
Well,
this time period is astounding to me.
Well, and the kicker is he was not that great of an artist. Like you look at his painting and you're like, there's no way that was a Vermeer. Like there's no way anybody even thought of it as a Vermeer, but it was authenticated as a Vermeer, despite the fact that it looked nothing like one.
Like, that's just so, I mean, I must have just been fascinating to just like research all of that. That's so amazing. So have you read or listened to the book? And it's not really about this kind of art theft, but The Art Thief, the new one that's out right now, and I can't think of the guy's name.
No.
Okay, so he is American, but he stole all of this art for personal, like for his like attic room of his mom's house. But he was stealing things that from like major museums, like how he stole, like he gives like how he takes the plexiglass off the back of the, I mean, incredible. Funny, but not funny, but it's just this. And so it's called The Art Thief. And it's really
That's so cool. That's like that show White Collar,
right. Exactly.
where the guy was such a charming, forger and thief.
Right.
And
he didn't do this to make any money. He didn't do it. He just, for the sheer beauty of the art, he wanted to possess it.
Wow.
And he lived with his mom. I think did he live in France? Wait a minute. I might be wrong. He might have lived in France. Oh, I don't remember now.
Incredible.
Anyways, I'm terrible. I read too
I
many
love
books and
stories
everything.
like that.
Oh, it's another really good one. If you after you read the Paris Deception and you're looking for some more art thief stuff. It's a good one. It's actually a true story. And then your Bakelite jewelry, when you were talking about that, it's like when I go, because I'm an antiquer, so when I go, it's like so beautiful. And
now
it's hard to find.
It's hard to find. No, every time I go to like vintage shops or to flea markets, I'm like tapping pieces together now because like Bakelite has like a very specific sound. So I'm like tapping all the pieces together to be like, is it plastic? Is it Bakelite? Like, let's find out.
Let's find out. And I mean, there was I just saw on a it actually had real jewelry in it though. I just saw on Antique Roadshow. They did a thing that somebody did one of the Chanel cuffs that like it was Helen Hayes, I think, had her great granddaughter. Did you see that?
I saw that one. Yes.
You said that, and that beautiful cuff, and it was just stunning.
Yeah.
So who knows what treasures people have that they think are plastic or whatever, and they probably have Bakelite and beautiful, like real jewelry. All right, ladies, this has been so much fun, and I love that your dog sleeps until 11. It's like, I think most dogs are up at 5 because they all want to go outside and eat.
I tell everybody that she's the reincarnation of Princess Margaret. She sleeps until
She
11.
really could be.
Yeah,
I love it. I love it. Well, I think we were talking earlier, about the book industry and some other stuff, and we might have to have a travel book industry just chit chat one of these days, Rachel. I think that we'd get lots of people that would come in and listen to us chit chatting about that. But Rachel, real quick, you mentioned, what is your new book and when's it coming?
Oh gosh, there's so much. So Castle Keepers just came out.
Right.
I am just finishing, like literally before I hopped on this book, my part of a book called The Liberty Scarf, again with Amy Runyon and Janelle Sazelski.
Okay.
And it's a scarf from Liberty of London that affects the lives of 3 different women in World War I.
Ooh.
So we're all in the same time period this time, unlike Castle Keepers. I'm working on edits for Operation Scarlet, which is my retelling of the Scarlet Pimpernel in
Oh, I
World War
can't-
II France.
When's that one coming?
That one was going to be December, but it needs a little bit more finessing, and it actually
Okay.
works out in my favor because now it's May 2024,
Okay.
and May is a much better month
Yeah.
for a book to come out.
Yeah.
And then I have oh my gosh. Then I have a biography I'm writing about Sir Christopher Wren, the architect, that is due for a UK publisher next year. And I've got 2 more books coming out with HarperCollins, and I just cannot talk about them publicly yet, but we'll
Okay.
get there. But writing a lot, and
researching, I'm sure trips and researching a lot.
yeah, I just got back from London. It was so amazing. I don't know, Bryn, you must feel the same way. This amazing thing that after years where you couldn't go anywhere, just that you can see people, you can go places, is kind of wonderful, even though aviation industry is crap right now, like getting
Right.
anywhere and all the cancellations. And
Yeah. But still, it's knowing that you can is even, you know,
yeah.
you can. That's a big one. Bryn, The Paris Deception, everybody go out and read it, but I can't, your new one sounds amazing too.
So good.
That idea of them being
So
separated by, I mean,
It's
kudos.
a lot. It's really interesting to write. Like, I'm loving the research.
I
Of course I'm
bet.
Such a different time period for you too, and that's what I love about you, Bryn, is that you don't really stay in one time period.
Right.
But you take the same tools and the same knowledge and the same brilliance that you have, but you use it towards different eras, and I love that so
Okay,
much.
before we go, I'm going to put both of you on the spot a little bit, and you cannot answer if you don't want to, but I'm kind of cracking myself up a little bit because I just thought of this one. Did y'all like history in high school? Because I'm thinking not. Oh, did you?
Oh yeah.
Oh, did you?
Especially, and this is tragic. I love Canadian history.
Okay.
And the book that got me an agent was set during the Halifax explosion, but no publisher touched it. And so I have not, and Herringford and Watts is set in Edwardian era Toronto, but I've had trouble getting publishers to, and I work with American publishers, but it's kind of been sad for me because I have not been able to write my own country as
That is
in the
kinda
way
that-
I'd love
yeah.
to.
So you were a history buff in high school. Okay, Bryn, I take it maybe you weren't.
Oh no.
I was huge.
So in grade 6, I was asked by my teacher, like, do you want to do like a special project? You can choose any subject, anything at all, and we'll get like a university student to come in and tutor you in it. And I chose the Second World War.
Okay.
So,
Well,
like,
there you go.
Yeah, we're nerds.
presentation that was like backed by Churchill speeches. Like, I am a complete and utter history buff. Day one, like, I absolutely love it.
Always.
Well, and then that is the authenticity that comes through in your books, because that is where all of the research is. Because I thought, I wonder if they were in high school, or was this just like later in life? Just
No one
No,
wants
I was a kid at the front of the class, like.
no one wants to read my boring Canadian history. Like, Canadian history is exciting, everybody. It's exciting.
I think you might have more of a chance now.
I think I mean, someone just did Halifax explosion, and I was like, boo.
Yeah,
So I
a
can't,
little bit
I
too-
mean, we cannot fault that author. Renee Rosen, how brilliant is this? She's doing one of her upcoming books is the story of the woman who created Barbie, whose name is escaping me now. How wonderful is that timing? Like, go her.
Right.
Go
Good.
live that success, you genius.
Isn't it amazing how I just read a book? I mean, we're getting totally off subject, and we're all just like, but I just finished a book called The Maniac by Benjamin Labatut, which is about Oppenheimer, and but it's not coming out till October. But it's
still,
all
it's
Oppenheimer,
in the
AI.
zeitgeist. Yeah.
It's just it's so weird when that happens. I love it. I love it. Well, yeah, the whole Barbie. Go see Barbie. Go read Renee Rosen's book.
Yeah.
Oh,
All
I
right,
love it.
everybody. This was really fun. Bryn, next book, come on over. Rachel,
Absolutely.
I'll
any
see you
other
in a few
brilliant
weeks.
ideas? Yeah.
I think Julie with
Yep, I think you
I
got
think we're
us
doing
with
Amy's Bakery
Amy's
in
book.
Paris. Yeah.
Yep. We got that. It's coming up in August. Any other brilliant ideas? Bring them on.
All right.
All right, everybody.
Thank you so much. Thank you so
Bye.
much.
Bye, Bryn. Bye,
Bye.
everybody.